Hey everybody, happy Friday. Hope everyone's having a great day and had a great week. So today is the last of our videos in our COVID-19 series concerning Governor Baker's new executive orders for Massachusetts, which by the way did go into effect at 12:01 a.m. today. So they are already in effect at the time I make this video and the time you're going to see it. And we talked about some of the executive orders earlier this week. Today I want to talk about the orders as they relate to public and private gatherings, so both in your own residence as well as public gatherings. What Governor Baker's order does is limit the size and number of people that can be at those gatherings, and further enforces the fact that people, while at those gatherings, need to be wearing face coverings as well as practicing social distancing. And what that applies to is essentially, again, anything at your private residence is going to have a size limitation, and as well as at most public venues that are available for events. That's going to be anything like a public park. We may get a license or permit to use an event venue, like, for a wedding or something like that. Any type of venue you could rent for a function or wedding or concert or whatever. Anything where, public or private, where people can be invited to, you could, again, rent, lease, license, or permit to be able to use it for that purpose. Those are the places it applies to. There are some exceptions to this particular executive order, certain types of functions or events that are exempted from it, and I'm going to talk about those right now. Religious functions or events are exempted in full. There are no size limitations on religious functions or events under this order. They are still expected to practice social distancing and wear masks, but they're not limited in the size of the members or people they can have at any particular functions because of the religious nature of it. Okay, political functions are not limited in size that they can have at their events for outdoor functions. So if it's any sort of political demonstration or rally or anything like that, as long as it's outdoors, they're not subject to the limitations of the number of people that they can have at this particular function. If it's indoors, they are subject to the limitations that I'm going to talk about in a couple of minutes. There are other entities and things and places that are not going to be subject to these limitations. One of those is businesses that were opened during either phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3 of the reopening plan. This is going to include a lot of businesses, but for most intents and purposes, what most people want to hear about is restaurants and other facilities were open during those phases. They're going to allow to remain open, and they're not going to be subject to the particular size limitations so long as they're otherwise following the rules that allowed them to reopen in the first place. So with regard to things like restaurants and things like that, they're limiting the number of seating like they were supposed to do. They're requiring people to wear masks until they get to their tables, things like that. They've essentially, moved tables apart so that everyone, is properly distanced from each other while they're eating. So things like that, as long as they're following the rules that were set forth previously, then they're not going to be subject to the particular size limitations. Okay. Other places or entities that aren't going to be subject to it is any federal government entity is not going to be subject to it. Schools, special needs programs, certain daycare programs, the courts and other judiciary are not going to be subject to any size limitations and the people who can gather in those venues. Also, in tandem with that, any correctional facilities and detention centers related to the courts, so the jails, the houses of correction, the state prisons, the DYS detention facilities are not subject to this particular order. Shelters, both homeless shelters as well as domestic violence shelters, otherwise known as battered women's shelters sometimes, are not subject to the particular order of the governor here. And I don't think I'm missing any, but just double checking. I think we got them all. Those places are also not subject to the size limitations in this order. So let's talk about a little bit about the places that are. Like I mentioned before, your private residence, your own home, is subject to these size limitations. And for you to have any sort of a gathering inside your home, you're limited to 10 people. Now, keep in mind, this doesn't include household members. So if you have a really big family or a bunch of people who have been living at your house as household members, and you have more than 10, that's okay. But if you have anybody over and then that's not part of your household, and the limit to an indoor gathering goes more than 10 people, you're in violation of this particular executive order. For private residences, if you are doing your event outside, so you're in the backyard, we'll say having a cookout or whatnot in the backyard, you're limited to 25 people. So that's for your private residence. Other venues, so gatherings at outdoor events, it is going to depend a little bit upon some other things. So for indoor events and other types of public venues, like I said before, that might include a function hall, or it could include, the Knights of Columbus or something like that. You rent out a function hall or a function room in a particular place. That's going to be limited to 25 people for any sort of indoor event that wasn't on the accepted list that we talked about a few minutes ago. So pretty much if you want to have a wedding or a kid's bar mitzvah or graduation party or anything like that, an indoor venue like that, you can be limited to 25 people by this new particular executive order. If it's an outdoor event, it's going to depend upon whether or not your community is considered a low-risk community for COVID cases. There was an earlier order that talked about what it meant to be a low-risk community. It was based upon the number of cases. It had to be 8 or fewer cases per 100,000 people in your town. There's a running list of those because it's updated every 3 weeks. Basically, you had to have 8 or fewer cases in the most recent 3 reporting periods. So it's like every 14 days is a reporting period. If you had 8 or fewer per 100,000 residents over those last 3 reporting periods, you consider a low-risk community. That can be found online to see whether or not you're currently a high-risk or low-risk community. But if you're in a low-risk community and your event is outdoors, you can have up to 100 people in a low-risk community. If you're not in a low-risk community, you're limited to 50 people for an outdoor event. One thing that will apply to all these events is the governor's earlier order that talked about the time limitations. You cannot have an event that goes past 9:30 p.m. That goes in tandem with the earlier executive order, or that was just the other executive order, I should say, that deals with the closure to the public of certain places at a particular time. And so basically, if you have any event going on, it can't go past 9:30 p.m. in any of these particular places, including your home. So you can't have any kind of event at your home that goes past 9:30 p.m., which I think is a little bit crazy, but that's pretty much what the order says. During any of the events, you are expected per this order to continue to maintain both social distancing, meaning staying 6 feet or more apart, as well as wearing facial covering. So indoors, outdoors, doesn't matter. If you're at any of these events where there are non-household members present, you got to be practicing both social distancing and wearing masks at any of this. Is all covered by the order. Now, what happens if you violate? So that's, I think, on a lot of people's minds. Similar to some of the other executive orders, they can levy fines. So the government, using either the Department of Public Health or local boards of health, that can involve the police, can issue fines of up to $500 per violation. And this is important to understand, because it's not just, okay, so let's just say police come to your house to break up a party, and you have 15 people there, you're only supposed to have 10 there. You're going to get not just one $500 fine for that particular violation. You're going to get a fine for each person over 10 people. Now, if it's past 9:30 p.m., you're probably also going to get an additional violation for it being past 9:30 p.m. So you're going to get all these, basically tacked on fines, and it can be per person. Also, another way they can try and shut you down is by going to the court and trying to get some sort of an injunction. So if they think you have a big event that's going to outstrip the size limits, they can actually go to the court and get an injunction from the court to try and shut down a particular event. But I think the more pressing concern and what most people will be subject to is these particular fines. As I mentioned before, these fines are similar to the others in the sense that they are a civil fine and not a criminal violation. You're not going to be subject to arrest. You're not going to jail for it, and it's not going on your record. But the fines could get hefty if you're not being careful, and if you get, and they actually try to enforce this order as it is. I think enforcement for any of these executive orders is going to be the hard part. I think to a large degree, the governor and the government of Massachusetts is expecting you to sort of abide by this on the honor system, and although they do reserve the right to enforce it, but I do think they're going to have some distinct challenges in trying to enforce it. Like I said, all of these particular executive orders, they relate to the COVID-19 pandemic. They're being issued as a result of the emergency powers granted the governor through a state of emergency, and they're pointing to the pandemic. Personally, I do think many of them infringe upon your rights under the Constitution. Until someone takes it up in court, we're sort of stuck with them. So my job here is to make sure that you understand what the orders are, what the potential penalties are, what your rights are, and what your responsibilities are. So if you have any questions about any of this, please feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email, and I'll be happy to speak with you about it.